Can you separate the art from the artist? I mean, music is subliminal messaging. So just because you aren't participating in the same activities or coming into the world with an artist's biases doesn't mean you aren't being affected by the way that they perceive the world. We're a new channel, so one thing that'll always help is if you like and subscribe. I want to start this off by talking about counterculture. Rage Against the Machine is a great example, but counterculture as a whole is where I want to go with this. So if you've ever spent some time in counterculture, you'll realize that a lot of the surrounding audience members within that element are people who come from a conservative background or people who are actually conservative. It kind of conflicts with the idea of counterculture, but it also goes hand in hand with what counterculture is. Counterculture is essentially just the outcast of society. So when you have so many people who are outcasted by society, you're gonna get a lot of people who may be bigoted in some way and come together having to deal with the fact that their favorite music is also listened to the people, or their favorite music is also listened to by the people that they really don't like, you know? I mean, the audience is usually a mixed bag of outcasts, so you're not expected to really conform to society's like standards within counterculture space. But within that, because there are so many outcasts, because there are so many people who are outcasts, but also stand very left leaning, this means you can get an anarchist, a liberal, and a Republican in the same room. You can get a far right Republican at at a Rage Against the Machine concert that, as time goes on, he starts to make friends at the concert. Those concert going friends start to realize what he is, but they're kind of just like, I mean, you can't be that bad because we like the same things and I've had good conversations with you. He starts to realize that, oh, maybe they're not that bad, and maybe I'm being displayed this in the wrong way, because we listen to the same music and we've had good conversation and I don't see anything wrong with you. There's a creator on TikTok. She took it upon herself to spend some days just listening to music endlessly, listening to, for about 30 days, I believe, listening to a specific set genre. And within this specific set genre, she decided to listen wholeheartedly to 5 particular artists. In those 5 artists, she decided that they would be within the genre, obviously, but they would be varying degrees within the genre, so that she could see if the music that she was listening to had any effect on her lifestyle. She made notion that, like, within her little science experiment, that her cognitive way of thinking had begun to change because she was being affected by the music. She couldn't say that in totality that was the only thing happening, but she was like, the way that I am approaching situations, the way that this has caused my life to move and gravitate in different ways, the way that this is affecting me is a very like surprising effect. I did not think that this would be the result, and so now I need to go back and check. But she decided to do the experiment again. This time she's doing it with trap, so or gangster rap is actually where she was going with it. She was going straight to gangster rap, so she's using artists like NLE Choppa, Youngboy, people associated in that like line of music, that genre, that subgenre there. And I think that's probably going to be a really interesting like development for her. I want to know like what the change is there. And I'll link her TikTok below so that way you can check it out. So there's been a pretty heavy line of discourse within the hip hop community, within the Black community specifically, about how mainstream hip hop negatively affects the way, like the brains of the youth. It takes away what it is to be like Black and strips it down to these very raw, inorganic, like schools of thought. And so all of the focus has been on people like Ice Spice, people like NLE Choppa, people like Youngboy, in particular, people like Sexxy Red lately. And with the focal point being on them, a lot of lines of questions are, does this negatively affect you? Does this mean that record labels are pushing this? Who's pushing this? Is it the people? Is it the label? And I think it's a little bit of both. Yeah. Labels are essentially just going to push what they know is popular. In effect, like, yes, we can think about it in terms of the fact that like they've already been pushing that. So they know that it's popular and they're the reason that it's popular. But the secondary aspect of that is that, yeah, people just find it appealing. It is music that like nest in the hearts of certain demographics, and it's not because they're promoting violent ideologies or promoting a lifestyle. It is because there are kids who are coming from these backgrounds that very much so need like a representation of what they come from. There are kids that have experienced this. There are kids that live through this all the time. Now, does this mean you're going to get a lot of imitation? Yeah, absolutely. We have a bunch of white kids from the suburbs implementing this style of rap into like what they rap about, knowing that they've never experienced these things, knowing that they've never seen this lifestyle, knowing that they've never had to deal with the hardships that are involved in this. Uh, and it's because partially because it's popular, and partially because it's whenever things are popular, it's easy to emulate. Emulation is like what is the Drake line? Imitation is flattery. There we go. Imitation is flattery, and so whenever people see something on populace on high demand, you're going to see a lot of people be like, well, I can do that, and I can do that, and I can do that. And it's a lot of people who don't need to do it. It's a lot of people who don't need to do it. I do want to lean into a different idea, though, with the question of can you separate the art from the artist? So, like, regardless of how you may feel about Drake, one way or the other, there's a lot of people on different sides of the coin. Is Drake's music good without Drake? And with this, it's kind of interesting. I want to step outside of music to discuss this. A friend posted an interesting question. Are the art and the art inseparable because of celebrity, or are they inseparable because of the art? There are a number of examples in the world of an artist not really having a good sphere of influence over any particular situation that involves the audience. In art, for example, in a lot of different other mediums outside of music, there are a lot of examples of the artist not really having a sphere of influence by name association with the audience. And even if there's name association by like lifestyle association, by the essence of celebrityism, this kind of leads me over to the idea of propaganda. Propaganda is a very tricky sort of thing. If you want to narrow it down to anything, everything is propaganda. When you really look at it, anything that you are consuming is propaganda. There's not really a way to avoid propaganda. Everything has a little bit of bias inside of it, whether it's on the left or the right. It doesn't really matter. It has bias inside of it. Propaganda is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. There was a study done by the Jewish Virtual Library. They focused in on the use of propaganda in World War II within the regime. And so within there is a very interesting sort of theme going on. Propaganda is one of the main points of battle strategy, per se. The use of propaganda, the way in which propaganda is distributed, how do you like tackle propaganda? All of these things are like very, very narrowed down, focused on by the government at the time. One thing that is mentioned is that the use of propaganda is really one of the key focuses on winning over the people, but also is one of the key focuses on winning the war. You can't really win a war without people, and that's something to think about. Joseph Goebbels was a leading factor in the propaganda movement, and in Joseph Goebbels, there's a very interesting quote that he had made. He said this about propaganda. He said, Another fundamental misunderstanding is the belief that propaganda is based primarily on lies and fabrication. It functions on a variety of kinds of truth: the outright lie, the half truth, the truth of context. To a certain extent, some view propaganda as essentially appeasing the irrational instincts of man. Propaganda was said to be best distributed by Goebbels by controlling the entire cultural life of a nation. This included comics, radio, film, television, any sort of media, news publication, any sort of media was involved in changing the public perspective of what it was to be in opposition with, you know where we're going with this, but it was sort of just all in training schools of thought. An interesting but kind of like woo-woo fact to mention is that the Pentagon is often recorded as, and I'm gonna link some of the sources for this, is often noted as adding funding for a lot of major blockbuster films. It's a common practice. It's narrowed down into the military budget because propaganda is a very, very keen thing to have, and you would not want negative opinions propagandized about the government or the US military. And so in order to use a lot of the big military equipment that is used, and it really can be as simple as like a pack of munitions, they then are allowed to really have free say as to what can be removed and what can't be removed, and they'll fund you fully or at a large portion, but they do a lot of funding. And I think that is an interesting thing to think about. And so with this, I do wonder, can you separate the art from the artist? Because in rough association, separating the art from the artist means that you are essentially just a master at debunking propaganda, a master of removing these frames of thought from your head, a master of removing subliminal messaging, which that's not really how psychology works. So, I mean, the knowledge, the resources are all there to, at the very least, show that there is some sort of influence on people through media, whether you know the artist or not, whether you know the intentions or not. The influence is always carried through. And so it is hard for me to say that you could separate the art from the artist, because logically you can't. Uh, but I have a video coming up about logic and whether logic is subjective or objective. With all of this being said, what are your thoughts? What do you take away from this? What do you believe? Do you think you can separate the art from the artist? After doing so much research, I don't think you can. I think it's almost impossible. But I guess anything is possible, really, in the grand scheme of things. So what do you think? What are your thoughts? Leave a comment. Let me know. We can chat about it in the comment section. And yeah,